All right, let's talk about one of the most stuck, most gridlocked political topics in the entire country. We're going to break down a recent study that takes a hard look at a century old tax to see if just maybe there's a new path forward in the firearms debate. And that really gets us to the core question of this whole explainer. I mean, is it even possible to design a firearms tax that could reduce homicides, but do it without hurting consumers or the industry? It kind of sounds impossible, right? But the answer might just be hiding in the data. So, to really get what they're proposing, we have to rewind a little bit and look at the history here. Because it turns out the federal firearms tax has been part of the picture for a very, very long time. This whole thing kicks off way back in 1918. A 10% excise tax was put on firearms, mostly to raise money for World War I. Then you fast forward to 1954, and it gets tweaked a little. 10% for handguns, 11% for long guns. Now get this. Those rates have not changed since. For over 70 years, this tax structure has been completely frozen in time. And that's the jumping off point for the new research we're digging into today. Okay, so if you're going to redesign this tax, you first have to understand what's actually happening in the market today. And what researchers found were two really powerful economic forces that are basically playing a game of tug of war, and it's making the whole market pretty inefficient. The first force is something economists call market power. Basically, it's when a handful of producers can charge way more for something than it actually costs to make. And the study found that for firearms, the average gun costs about $450 to produce, but it sells for around $870. That is a massive markup, and what it does is it actually reduces the number of guns sold compared to a more competitive market. The second force pulling in the other direction is negative externalities. You can think of these as the hidden costs to society that don't show up on the price tag. Now, in this case, the research zeroes in on the biggest one, the public health costs that come from firearm homicides. That cost isn't baked into the price of a gun, so the market just doesn't account for it. So you've got this constant push and pull. On one side, you've got market power, which is making prices too high and selling fewer guns. But on the other side, you've got these negative externalities, which means the prices are actually too low because they don't include those social costs, leading to too many guns being sold. The bottom line is the market's kind of messed up. It's not really optimized for social well-being. And this is where things get really interesting. This is the big aha moment of the study. Instead of just lumping all firearms together, the researchers asked a simple question. What if the social costs are different depending on the type of gun? And oh boy, what they found changes the entire conversation. They zeroed in on one very specific, very powerful question. If you crunch all the numbers, what is the total lifetime social cost from homicides that comes from buying one single average firearm? Okay, let's start with long guns. You know, your rifles, your shotguns. The study calculated that the average long gun purchase creates a lifetime social cost from homicides of about $163,000. All right, remember that number. That's our baseline. Now, let's look at handguns. The lifetime social cost from homicides linked to the average handgun purchase is, wait for it, $5,260. I mean, the difference is it's breathtaking. And this right here is the absolute heart of the study. The data is crystal clear. Handguns carry a social homicide cost that is more than 30 times greater than long guns. And that massive gap isn't just some wild statistic. It's the key that unlocks a whole new way of looking at this problem. So, now that they have this bombshell data, what do they do with it? Well, they were able to propose a very specific, very targeted redesign of that old federal tax. And they call it a second best solution. So what on earth does second best mean? Well, it's just a term for finding the best solution you can when you have to play by certain real-world rules. And in this case, the rule was political reality. They basically said, okay, let's find a tax that makes society better off, but, and this is crucial, it cannot make current firearm consumers any worse off. So here it is. Here's the redesign. It's pretty elegant, actually. Instead of that old blanket tax, the proposal is to nudge the tax on handguns up just a little, from 10% to 14.5% to account for that high social cost. And then, at the same time, you completely get rid of the 11% tax on long guns. That helps cancel out those high prices from market power. It's all about rebalancing based on the data. Okay, so that's the plan. But would it actually work? What does the economic model predict would happen if we did this? Well, the answers are pretty mind-blowing and suggest that, amazingly, almost everyone comes out ahead. The results from the model are just wow. First off, what happens to consumers? Well, consumer surplus, the value they get, stays exactly the same. Check, that was the goal.
But here's where it gets wild. Industry profits are actually predicted to go up a little bit. And, of course, public health gets a huge boost with an estimated 176 homicides prevented over 7 years. All told, it adds up to a net gain for society of $258 million every single year.
But here is the real kicker, the part that nobody saw coming. The model predicts that the states that would see the biggest public health benefits, the largest drop in homicides, are actually more conservative states. And it happens without making the consumers in those states any worse off. Now that is the kind of detail that could actually make a policy politically possible. The researchers wrap it up by saying this is what's known as a Pareto improvement, which is really just a fancy way of saying it's a win-win. It's a rare policy change that can make some people better off without making anyone else worse off. By using data to target the real problems, social cost, and market power, it offers a potential path right through the political gridlock. And that leaves us with a final, bigger question, doesn't it? We've been focused on one very specific, very tough issue. But this core idea of using detailed data to find these clever second-best solutions that respect the political realities on the ground, could that be a way forward for other incredibly divisive issues? It's definitely something to think about.